today's video is a little tidbit on pasture rotation, or at least what we're trying to accomplish here with our Icelandic sheep.
And that is what a happy flock of sheep looks like. Rotating onto new pasture. We're trying to be really good at this year. So I'll show you where they just came from. So this is where they were. You can see we didn't let them eat it right down. There's still a couple inches of grass left there, and as usual, nobody eats the goldenrod. But they pruned up the apple trees beautifully to nice kind of shoulder height, which is what we like them doing. And we got them out of here before they started actually eating the trunks of them, causing any damage.
Well, as you saw, we just moved the sheep from one pasture to the other, and the pasture one is potentially a little longer than it needs to be, but at the same time that'll give us a bit of grace period. Now, I guess, why is the pasture rotation important? Well, one word or two words, the barber pole worm. For us, that's the biggest consideration.
Well, all worms in general, can be helped by rotation.
But the barber pole worm is the big nemesis when you're raising sheep.
That's the killer when it comes to sheep.
That's the silent killer. You'll see signs, but it's a pretty quick killer when it gets that bad.
So sort of one of the natural kind of approaches we're taking. I mean, as you saw in our earlier video with moving them out onto pasture, everybody was wormed with a paste wormer. Yes, chemical, but at this point we know we have the barber pole worm, so we have to tackle it strong, trying to kind of minimize it on the property. So basically what we're trying to do is move our herd of sheep every 5 to 6 days from one pasture to another. Doesn't matter how much they've eaten down or how much is left there, they move. When it comes to the barber pole, you have about 4 days from when the manure is placed onto the ground. You have about 4 days before the larvae starts to, it's not evacuate, but leave the manure and climb the stalks and things like that. So as long as they haven't eaten it right down, we've got a bit of a grace period. That's why we're going with the 5-6 days, because we only have, at this point in time, 5 pastures. But the goal is to get them off of a pasture for a minimum of a whole month. So right now, that means a 5 to 6 day cycle in order to get that full 30 days. Eventually it will escalate to more as we increase our number of fenced pastures. But it is very important to do this so that they're not ingesting those worms again, especially the young ones. We do find that our older girls and ewes, they can handle it. We find we don't, after that first year, we don't have a lot of issues with them. Even if they do get it, they seem to have a tolerance. But it's the young lambs that need to make sure you're moving them because they're the ones that are most susceptible.
This is a good little example, kind of scanning around here. You can see the sheep have eaten, I don't even know what the percentage, but a fairly large percentage of the grass down. Now, if you rotate them fairly frequently, they don't, or at least the Icelandics, don't seem to eat it right to the ground. They kind of have a, I'm going to call it a natural worm avoidance. A little bit more like...
Sorry, I'm going to cut in, but just saying that, I'm going to put my finger in here so that people can see. It is only to my knuckle. Mm-hmm. And you don't really want them to eat that down to less than 3 inches, because the worms themselves, the larvae, don't really climb much more than 3 inches. So as you can see, we are starting to get to that precarious zone here, which is why we definitely need to move
Which
them.
is basically why the cycle we have. Like we said, they've actually, this was day 6. So they have been in here 6 days, but they've eaten what they want to eat, and they've left what they don't want to eat. So we will be mechanically mowing some of this goldenrod, because unfortunately in the pastures, even though goldenrod is great to have around, in the pastures with the sheep there are some issues because it will shade out your other forages. And apparently, and I don't know how scientifically proven this is with sheep, but it does act as a little bit as a blood thinner. So when you're dealing with barber pole worms that suck blood, there's probably a reason why the sheep avoid it at certain times of the year. So here comes another tool in the defense against barber pole worms. The horses, at least one horse. Essentially, one thing you can do is have a completely unrelated species that is not susceptible to the worms come into the pasture, as Bucky is greatly accommodating right now. Oh, he wants water. But they can come into the pasture, and because essentially the worms, if they're ingested by the horse, it's terminal. They die, so they break the cycle. So by having the horses come in for a little bit, probably not a full week, but you're probably looking at a couple days. This is where it gets a bit interesting monitoring your pasture, because we figured out the 5-day cycle on the sheep works quite well. The horses, like I say, you might be
right there. He's eating all that stuff that the sheep skip that would be having the larvae going up.
Exactly, and he's coming in, or both of them are coming into the pasture here at the point at which the worms would have hatched and a percentage of them would have climbed the stalk. So this should help reduce it. Now, horses are obviously not the only animal that you can use for this. Cattle will work, although cattle won't trim it as close as the horses. Geese can work to a degree. We even were sort of noticing the kuni pigs worked a little bit. Each species has its pros and cons. Now, a word of caution: we have no practical experience with this, but if you are thinking of using alpacas or llamas as a control animal, that is not advised, because they are also, even though they are not related to sheep or goats, as a pseudo-ruminant, i.e. they have a 3-chambered stomach, I believe, they are also susceptible to the barber pole worm, so they don't work. So you do have to do your research as to what species are not suitable hosts, but if you can incorporate a species that is a suitable host, it can help, although it will make your pasture rotations that much more complicated. The nice part is they're very willing workers. There's also a good point with the horses too, because early in the season when the grass is growing quite lush, when the sheep have gone through, although there's still plenty of nutrition in this grass, the horses and the ponies in particular are not getting the full nutrient value out of it, i.e. the sheep have already picked over it, which is potentially not a bad thing. So what I just said there, I think, is very important about adding an extra species to your pasture rotation. Although there are some really, really positive benefits to it, it's going to make your pasture rotation more complicated. And there really likely is not a one-size-fits-all solution for everybody. What you're going to have to do, to be kind of blunt about it, is you're really going to have to watch your animals. You're going to watch their overall condition. You're going to have to watch how quickly they eat it, and you're going to have to adjust over the seasons. If you live somewhere that has distinct seasons, you're going to get differences over time, because right now we're sort of mid-spring. Everything's lush, everything's growing like crazy. We have more food than our animals can consume. But come summer, that will change. The growth of the grass and everything else that they eat as forage is going to slow down. And when it slows down, it's going to require some slight changes in grazing management. So a tough part with grazers of any kind is you can go online and find stocking densities. And those stocking densities are a really good starting point. But at a homestead scale, I'm going to say it this way: unless you have impeccably perfect pasture and excellent fencing and everything's prepared and everything's perfect and going to continue to work perfect forever, which is really not going to happen, you are probably going to be safer going at a lower stocking density than what you tend to read about. So a lot of the times for sheep, they recommend 5 to 6 ewes, depending on the size of them and whatnot, per acre. And that includes their babies. So that's assuming that they all have twins. That's a lot of sheep. And if you only have an acre and you have 5 sheep, you're probably going to find, as you go through the seasons, you're going to run out of pasture at certain times. Maybe that's okay, but when you're dealing with things like the barber pole worm and other internal parasites, you could really get yourself into some problems pretty quickly. So definitely a much bigger topic, but some food for thought, or thought for food, thought for growing your food, and yeah, just some things to think about there. So as we end this video, I'm going to scan across here, and this is a great way to lose an entire flock of sheep. This pasture, which we call Pasture 1, is approximately an acre. It's pretty big, and we have 15 adults. 3 of them are yearlings, so that don't have babies. But so we think, even though we are trying to do the 5-day rotation, this pasture probably will work a little longer than that. And the reason why is, as you can see from those sheep over there, it's really high, so they're not eating low down at the moment. But anyways, we'll see how it goes. We'll monitor them and adjust accordingly. So hopefully you found this interesting, useful, just enjoyable to watch, all the above. And we'll talk to everyone later.